Hey everyone, Warwick's here. With BfA coming to a close and everyone's eyes towards the Shadowlands, I wanted to take a step back and look at the journey that each class had in BfA. Today we're going to be looking at Demon Hunters in part 5 of our 12-part series. The way that these videos work is that we look at each spec individually and grade them on a scale of D tier, the lowest, to S tier, the highest. Since the specs perform differently in Mythic Plus and in Raid, we'll grade each aspect of PvE individually and then average the grade. Before we get immersed in the fell specs of Demon Hunter, a quick shout out to the sponsor of this video, my Twitch stream at twitch.tv/works_BAA. All footage you see here was captured during my stream. Catch me here, catch me there Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursday nights from 9:30 p.m. to midnight Central Standard Time US. Come to feel better about your own gameplay. Let's go ahead and get started with Vengeance Demon Hunter. Vengeance has seen more of the same issues that were there in Legion carry over to BfA. As I mentioned in my tank rankings video, I felt Vengeance had an identity crisis this expansion. I go into more detail there if you're curious to see my more detailed thoughts. As for Mythic Plus, Vengeance felt designed with dungeon runs in mind, more than as a raid tank. The Sigil's utility found a lot more value on trash pools, and the dangers of their demon spikes and metamorphosis uptime being lower is diminished in dungeons, and also with essences and corruptions heading into 8.3. This made the tank more competitive for higher keys and made them easier to deal with from a healer perspective if you were running lower keys. If we just looked at 8.2 and 8.3, I think Vengeance would receive a pretty decent grade. However, 8.0 and 8.1 still existed this expansion, where Vengeance had a bad time doing anything relevant in the tank world of Mythic Plus. Their mitigation was pretty abysmal, and their offensive kit was okay, but sacrificed a lot defensively to do respectable damage. I think it became average at best by the end of the expansion, with some players being able to really show it off, and others really struggling with it. Grade C. In Raid, I can only think of one world first level guild that ran a Vengeance Demon Hunter, and that was Pieces, since one of their tanks got a best slot corruption on that character before any of his other tanks. Other than that, Vengeance slowly gained in representation over the course of the expansion, but was still behind Death Knight, Monks, and Paladins. The defensive style play with Gluttony and Feed the Demon did much better here because you had abilities like Misdirection and Tricks of the Trade to help with threat. Some of the same issues with Mythic Plus apply here though. When you had demon spikes and metamorphosis up, you felt unkillable. When you didn't have them up, you felt like a wet paper bag. I think Vengeance was underrated this entire expansion as a raid tank, but even with 8.0 and 8.1 being difficult times for them, it never really got a perception of being a solid tank. The grade is a C. The overall grade for Vengeance is a C. Vengeance has some interesting support coming to Fell Devastation in Shadowlands, which definitely has me curious about the spec. At their core though, the big issues remain. Their rotation is pretty boring, and the Soul Fragment system requires Spirit Bomb to be able to utilize it effectively. Taking out a talent row basically for the mandatory talent of Spirit Bomb, I don't think is a good thing. It should just be baselined. Hopefully they iterate the spec more as we move forward into beta. Alright, now to Havoc Demon Hunter. Havoc has had itself a very nice BfA. While the spec is very pick up and play, which gives it a meme of being a little bit too easy in some people's eyes, the spec is fantastic and a goal of what most specs should aim for. In Mythic Plus, they had great damage in both AoE and single target, making them great additions on Fortified or Tyrannical. They had a lot of passive leech, a 1-minute defensive and blur, and very little build variance to push that high damage. They also claimed 5% of all magic damage a group did. Okay, so that might have been sarcasm, and some of this is sarcasm overall. I think Havoc had too many tools this expansion in all situations. They were always the top tier DPS, even though if one other spec outshined them in NDI, such as Outlaw, Unholy, Beast Mastery, potentially even Windwalker. In high key pushing comps though, they were a staple this entire expansion. Their toolkit is a lot like Beast Mastery in that it has no inherent weaknesses. They have great damage in all situations, they're hard to kill, they have insane mobility. They're always a solid choice to bring. I think the only reason not to bring a Demon Hunter is if you either have one already in your group, or if you know that that particular Demon Hunter isn't the best player. Grade S tier. In Raid, a Demon Hunter was required, at least one of them. In 8.3, you could bring more than one because they just pumped damage until their eyes bled. No serious raid team ever went without a Demon Hunter in their group. Why? Well, 2 words: Chaos Brand. Giving an entire raid 5% more magic damage when a mythic raid team will have 9 to 11 ranged DPS generally is a massive buff in damage. Combine that utility with their high damage, and you had a guaranteed raid spot if you were the only DH that was raiding in your guild. In 8.3, they had a lot of good scaling with the proc corruptions, and it only increased their damage output. Chaos Brand and its cousin Mystic Touch are massive problems going into the next expansion in my eyes, but that's another video for another time. For the purposes of Battle for Azeroth, all these factors made Demon Hunter a must-have for Raid, and on top of that, they pulled their weight very well. Grade, S tier. Overall grade is an S tier. Havoc took some targeted nerfs in Shadowlands, and the spec definitely has the possibility of having a weakness or two. Its rotation is still very few button presses, and the talent reshuffle makes some talent choices a bit more tricky. Build diversity isn't bad, as long as each build finds a place. This expansion, it did everything at a high level. In Shadowlands, that might change, and while there are some pain points, I think it's the right direction for the spec long term. Well, that's my thoughts on both specs of Demon Hunters. As a primary tank player myself, Vengeance still doesn't crack my top 3 behind Death Knight, Druid, or Monk for intrigue levels going into Shadowlands. However, I still think the changes there are mostly positive, with 1 or 2 glaring issues that really need to be addressed. For Havoc, I think the spec is going to fall back in line with the rest of their melee colleagues, with 1 still being mandatory for raids as long as Chaos Brand exists in the game. Anyways, how did you guys rate Demon Hunter this expansion? Leave a comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot to me if you would. Next up, we're going to do Monks. Until then, stay safe, wear your mask, if you're an American, vote this November, and I will see you next time.